brings us down to the last application of the evening, 2997 Beechwood Latch LLC, 101 Hill Street.
The applicant, David Gilmartin Jr., from law firm Farrell Fritz, 50 Station Road, Watermill, New York. First, I'd like to, a little housekeeping. We'd like to incorporate the prior file, 2983, into the record on this matter. We made the application as an amendment to our prior application. The building department made the determination it was a new application, so we'd like to incorporate everything that we've submitted and that has been submitted to the public record on that. I'm handing forward a handout of information that the board has asked for at previous hearings, and it has smaller versions of the site plan that you may be able to go through when the engineer comes up. By way of background, when the current owners, who are Michael Dubb and Stephen Dubb, who are right here, when they bought the property, they came to us and asked, what can we do with it? And out of that conversation, we had three options. Two options that we had 5 options. 2 were automatically disqualified: a subdivision of the property and continue to run it as is because they were not financially feasible. So the first option that we look at was a change to the motel zone. The motel zone is something that had been proposed back in 1991 in a study done by the planning board. And then secondly, the 2000 comprehensive plan identified the property as a future commercial use. In looking at that, the yield, and using both the Terry Cottage and the Village Latch property, this application is only for the Village Latch. We've removed the Terry Cottage, but in a zone change, we would have included the Terry Cottage. At 3,000 square feet per unit, we would have yielded 76 units. The second option that we looked at was a zone change under the MFPRD, which is your Chapter 116.61. That would allow a multifamily planned residential development. That's how Cooper's Farm condominiums were developed. That would allow us 6 units per acre under that zone. If you look at the legislative intent of that law, they called 6 units per acre medium density. One of the other limiting factors under that was lot coverage, and lot coverage was permitted at 20%. The application that we have before you today is 19.61. So we would have met the MFPRD. Third option was to change from one non-conforming use to another. That's the application that's before you today. We went this route for 2 reasons. One, we didn't need the 30 units per acre that the MFPRD would have yielded. And secondly, the prior owner of this property, George Benedict, is the father-in-law of the former mayor, Mark Epley. Both the MTL district, that zone change, and the MFPRD, we would have been required to go to the Board of Trustees. Based on discussions with various village officials, we decided for conflict reasons and the appearance of impropriety not to do that we could accomplish what we needed to do under this application.
Oh, he no longer is part of this application.
He is no longer part of this application. So we made the application under 116-28C3, which allows you to change the certificate of occupancy of a piece of property from one non-conforming use to another. We appeared before you on January 28th, 2016. At that time, you referred us to the planning board, who was the expert in accomplishing the secret process. So we went through the secret process, and we spent 1.5 years doing it. In April of 2016, we agreed to a Type 1 designation, and we agreed to do an environmental impact statement. The draft of that impact statement is here. On August 1st, a public scoping session was held to determine what the contents of that study would be. The scoping session then turned into a document, and we drafted it Went to the planning board reviewed it with their consultant. They required significant changes to it, and we made those changes. In March of 2016, a public hearing was held on the DEIS, and it was held open for further testimony until March 20, 2017. After that process, we had to go to the final environmental impact statement, and that's this document. Planning board circulated that document, filed it with the village, and on September 5th, they adopted a finding statement, which took all of the information in here and reduced it to their findings on this property, including an analysis of the exact one you're looking at today for this property. So
That is excluding the Terry cottage?
no, it did not exclude the Terry cottage. It included the Terry cottage. So the conclusion that's found in this finding statement is your sister board, the planning board. This board was an involved agency. It was referred to at every step during the process, and you had the opportunity to comment. And I would submit that this board is subject to that finding statement. There are several extraordinarily important findings, and they're important to this process. The consideration that you have to undertake with this application. Is it beneficial to the neighborhood? There are several conclusions that are extraordinarily important. First, the planning board noted that there was a preservation of historic resources. Second, the protection of natural resources, groundwater and Lake Agawam. You're going to hear from our engineer today and listen to the impacts that developing this property is going to have. They're startling environmental benefits that will follow an approval of this. The finding statement also held that the density is in line with other projects in the area, and most importantly, the planning board concluded that the change is going to be beneficial to the neighborhood. And that's, again, the crux of the argument before you. Is this change beneficial to the neighborhood? That's what you have to decide. And to that point, the planning board, in the finding statement, stated, overall, the change in non-conforming use from a rooming house to an attached community would be beneficial to the general neighborhood. We've submitted that finding statement. It's a village document. If you look at page 15, that's where that statement is made by the planning board. Planning board also found that an approval of this will eliminate an illegal overuse of the property. It'll incorporate adequate infrastructure. It'll resolve the concerns about the impacts to Agawam and the groundwater. It'll provide a use that's compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, residential, as opposed to the current commercial use. It'll provide permanent patrons for village businesses. It'll enhance property values. And one of the most important things and one of the biggest challenges as we went through that process is it will maintain the historic character of the village through the retention of the village latch building and the Terry cottage. The finding statement overwhelmingly supports a grant of this application. And that was before we made significant changes that will reduce the impact. I have Kevin Walsh, as our engineer, is going to take you through the changes, starting with the initial site plan that we had. We have our traffic engineer, Bob Esbacker, here. We'll take you through a couple of benefits of the change and then try and answer any traffic questions that you have. David Emolina is our planner. He's going to provide an analysis of the impact to the neighborhood. And then Michael Dubb, who I introduced before, is the principal of Beechwood. He started as a landscape design and landscape company, and he's going to talk to you about the landscaping issues and how we are going to go about developing the landscaping on the site so we reduce the impact. Before I turn it over to Kevin, we did an analysis of the MFPRD, which I think is the closest zone that would be applicable to this property that would provide a comparison. So we did a consistency analysis, and I just want to hand that up. Take a look, and under that consistency analysis, you could see that we could have made the application under the MFPRD. It could have been a 30-unit development. We chose to go with less, and I'll ask Kevin to come up and go through the changes that we've come through and let you know where we are today in the project.
Good evening, members of the board. As Mr. Gilmartin said, I'll walk you through the changes to the plan that have taken place since the, I guess since the original application and the submission of the DEIS, which is what this plan consists of. It might be helpful if I can put these side by side so I can walk you through those and everybody can see. And I'll do the best I can with these upside down here. So as we mentioned, you have the original plan that had 24 units total, including the Terry Cottage, which was going to be converted to 2 units, and the Latch Building, which was going to be converted to 3 units. There was a new pool and clubhouse proposed in between the buildings, as well as a large motor court that had some freestanding garages to serve the units. The current plan as it stands right now consists of 23 units. That's including the Terry Cottage, which, as Mr. Gilmartin said, has been removed from the application, but for the sake of an apples-to-apples comparison, most of what I'll be talking about in terms of numbers will compare the original plan, which included the Terry Cottage, to the current plan, which, although it does not include the Terry Cottage, I'll fold the numbers into that. So, as I said, it's apples to apples. So the
Kevin,
original,
just
yeah,
to clarify, so the former site plan had 24 units.
correct.
This plan now, with the Terry Cottage, has 23.
That's correct. Okay. So the original plan had 7 units in 3 buildings bordering each of the properties to the east and west. The current plan has 6 units in the 3 buildings bordering the adjacent properties. The buildings in the current plan are separated by about 59 feet, which is comparable to what the separation is, for example, on the Whitefield property. There are only 2 units in each of the buildings in the current plan, as opposed to the original plan, which had a mix of 2 and 3 unit buildings. As a result, these buildings are only about 110 feet wide, again, by comparison to 130 feet wide or so on the Whitefield side, just for comparison purposes. The freestanding garages in the motor court have been removed. The clubhouse and the pool has been moved from where it was before between the Terry Cottage and the Latch Building over to the northeast corner, adjacent to the village property, so we essentially don't have any neighbors over there. And while the total number of condominium buildings remains the same, as I said, we're reducing the size of the buildings so that the impact is different, and we're reconfiguring the building footprints so that we now keep everything outside that 35-foot setback along both of the side property lines on the east and west. And I'll get into why that's significant a little bit later. The result of all these changes, we have a decrease in the building coverage from about 55,356 square feet to 41,822 square feet. And again, that includes the Terry Cottage, so we're talking about apples and apples, even though that's not part of this application. The gross floor area goes from 86,517 square feet to 73,732 square feet under the current plan, again, apples to apples. As far as access goes, we've relocated the main driveway to the center, essentially the center of the property, and we're winding it into the site from the middle of the property. As a result, we're removing the original driveway access to the Latch and the Terry Cottage from Hill Street, They will both have their access off the main drive that services the property, so we're going from two under the prior plan to a single access to Hill Street. And Mr. Eschbacher will talk a little bit more about that later. And just one other feature of the change in the access is we've managed to curve it through the trees and the hedge line there so that visually from Hill Street, you're not going to be looking down the road, down a long road of buildings. You'll essentially see the same thing you see today, which is the latch, the Terry Cottage, and the hedgerow. And you won't be able to see down that road. So as far as the other benefits that derive from this, it's probably best if I go through the other plans to point those out. First of which is the grading and drainage plan. And the revised plan has the same exact intent that we had under the original plan, in that we will be capturing and storing and infiltrating all of the runoff from this development on site. It's a fully upgraded stormwater management system. It will provide benefits to Lake Agawam, important benefits to Lake Agawam, which is about 1,400 feet or so to the southeast, and it's known to have issues with nitrogen contamination and excuse me, pollution owing to the collection of surface water, surface runoff of roads, roofs, and things that ultimately make their way into the lake. And in fact, what's important about that is in going through some of the prior studies that have been done, some of which are on the village website regarding Lake Agawam and the condition of it, excuse me, one of the recommendations in those reports that continually pops up is the recommendation to intercept and recharge stormwater at the upper elevations of the watershed. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're not giving that water a chance to get into Hill Street, get into the adjacent roadways, overland flow to the drainage system, and then into Agawam Lake. In fact, the prior investigations that were done, one of them was by P.W. Grosser for the prior application, identified the fact that the storm drainage on the site now consists of a single 8-foot diameter, 4-foot deep dry well with about 200 cubic feet of volume of capacity for the entire site. Just to put that into context, according to those studies, the runoff from the site as it exists now totals about, or creates under a 2-inch storm scenario, which is the village's design criteria, approximately 19,100 cubic feet of runoff, or 141,700 gallons, if you prefer, of runoff. Again, overwhelming that single 8-foot diameter, 4-foot deep dry well. There is essentially, for all intents and purposes, no drainage on this property now. So everything makes its way to Hill Street or the surrounding properties and ultimately to the other surrounding roads and down to Lake Agawam, according to the watershed studies that have been done. As noted, we're providing a complete stormwater management system that'll comply with the village standards as well as the Speedies permit requirements. Again, we will collect, infiltrate all of the stormwater from the roofs, roadway areas, landscaped areas on the site, keeping it on the site, and that represents obviously a vast improvement over the current conditions. Moving on to the utility plan. As part of the original submission, we had shown, and we show on the current plan as well, the routing of the utilities, including water, electric, gas, et cetera, including the placement of the sewage disposal systems, and all with the proper setbacks so we can prove that everything fits on the property, obviously. We had explained last time that the property has approvals from the Suffolk County Department of Health Services for 6,950 gallons per day of sewage discharge based on the current use. And while the applicant would be permitted to install conventional sewage disposal systems for this project, which would consist of septic tanks and leaching pools designed to contain that flow, the applicant has and continues to commit to installing the innovative and alternate treatment systems that the health department recently approved for use on residential and multifamily properties. And even though I'll point out the Terry Cottage, as we have been saying, is no longer part of this application, we would propose to retrofit the Terry Cottage with an IA system as well. The reason that's important, or one of the reasons that's important, is, as discussed in some of the prior reports, the current property has substandard sanitary, a number of substandard sanitary systems that consist of cesspools only. In other words, the waste goes directly into a leaching pool, no septic tank, and into the ground. One of the things that's discussed in those reports is the fact that raw effluent has approximately, loads approximately 65 milligrams per liter of nitrogen into the ground. With the current cesspool system, they expect that gets reduced to about 50 milligrams per liter. Not much benefit there. With a conventional septic system, I had pointed this out last time, we believe you get to somewhere between 40 and 50 milligrams per liter, so it's a little bit better, but not great. But the innovative and alternate systems are required to perform in such a way that the maximum loading is 19 milligrams per liter of nitrogen out of these systems. So what we're talking about here is a 62% reduction from what's happening now in nitrogen being put into the groundwater that contributes to Lake Agawam. And again, going back to the studies that have been done, one of the recommendations was that the village explore potential sewering of the areas within the watershed. Now, while this doesn't qualify as sewering per se, in the sense that they discussed in the reports, it's the next best thing. Short of a full-blown sewage treatment plant that would get you down below 10 milligrams per liter, we're providing for a situation where we can reduce that loading from what's going on today and could continue without any improvements if the property remained as is. We're reducing that by 62%. And I'll just note that that's important as identified in the studies, because according to the studies, 49% of that nitrogen that's getting dumped into Lake Agawam comes from wastewater other than the downtown commercial area. Okay. And last but not least, we prepared a conceptual, what I'll call a boundary landscape plan, and the reason for that is while we had a fully developed landscape plan last time for the submission that went in with the DEIS, the revisions that we're talking about in terms of the buildings and the layout have been evolving fairly recently, so we haven't, the architecture isn't finalized enough that we can develop all the internal landscaping, but obviously we can assure you that it will be of the same quality and type that we showed on the original landscape plan. We just haven't worked out the details yet. But the purpose of this plan, and in particular the photos that you have in the package that was handed up, are to show that we're still proposing a substantial supplement to the perimeter buffers, and that the fact that we've moved these buildings or consolidated these buildings a little bit so that they're all 35 feet off the property lines gives us a little bit more room to try to preserve as much of the existing vegetation as we can. Going back to those photographs for a second, particularly on the Whitefield side, because there's been a lot of discussion about that, you can see in the photographs that there is a heavy line of existing vegetation along the property line, fully mature trees, a mature hedgerow. Most of that is actually on the Whitefield property, and as such will not be disturbed as part of this development. But what we would propose to do is to supplement that with a double row of a mix of evergreen plantings, spruce, arborvitae, cedar, things like that, that will supplement that existing tree and hedge buffer on both sides, in addition to a 6-foot-high solid fence on both sides, so that at any time of the year you've got effective screening by virtue of the fence and the evergreens. And obviously in the spring, summer, and fall months, you've got the fully developed trees and hedgerow that's there now. And that applies obviously all around the property. So,
Are there any plans for Terry Cottage?
Plans for Terry Cottage?
It'll be developed as a single-family dwelling, separate and apart from the...
So it's being divorced from this application?
Correct. It will be...
It's now on its own property?
It is currently,
Yeah.
and it will remain that way, and it'll be rehabbed and brought back to its original splendor.
As a single-family residence?
Single-family residence.
Now, in this new plan, parking, are you providing more parking than the previous plan?
More parking than the code requires. It's been adjusted a little bit, and Mr. Eschbacher will get into that with in conjunction with the traffic, if you like.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about the parking. Also, I was reading through this that you meet the fire marshal requirements.
Yes.
Is that recent?
Well, no. If you recall, the last time we were here, one of the previous presentations, we had at that time received a letter or some comments from the fire marshal. The comments that came out last time can be addressed in exactly the same way on this plan. As we said, we would address them on this plan. It had to do with providing for the vehicle turning movements to turn the trucks around. We have the same exact configuration of a hammerhead here that we had under the other plan.
But you still have to do that and have to demonstrate that.
Well, we have to make a formal application to the
So he
fire
hasn't really
marshal.
signed off on this. You have
No,
to.
but we've addressed the comments that they've given us based on their review of the plan that was submitted with the DEIS.
And
All
we
right,
did
good.
speak to him. We did speak to the fire marshal. He's satisfied, but he will certainly...
Well, I talked with him also. So he said, as a week and a half ago, that really he came up with a list of questions and that you haven't addressed any of them yet with him.
No,
So I guess I would like to know.
We did on the prior plan about a year ago, and certainly he'll...
Yeah, well, that was left hanging, so I didn't know if you had gone back with this new plan.
He has not seen the new plan.
Okay, so you have to go through the whole
Yeah,
process
we have to
with
go through that process with him, and it'll be during the site plan
Right,
process.
but I can assure you that the comments that he had before with respect to the hammerhead turnaround are exactly the same. The positioning of the hydrants would be exactly the same. No parking signs along the road because it's a fire apparatus road. Those things are all easily achievable in this plan, same as they were in this plan.
Okay.
How are you going to enforce the no parking along the road? Supposing that somebody has a party.
There's a homeowners association that'll be required to enforce that. We do have experience with setting that up, and it has worked very efficiently at Bishop's Pond, and it's the same developer.
Fire marshal, he had a concern about that because he said that he's gone through Bishop's Pond and he said, like you have driveways and you have garages on these houses.
Right.
He says, and a lot of people don't use the garage for a garage. They use it for storage and whatever else they want to use it for. So the parking gets pushed into the driveway and then onto the street. So he said that was a concern that there be enough additional parking for that cocktail party, birthday party, anniversary party, family get-togethers, that happen all year long. So that'll be a concern that I have, so.
We will certainly address it. I think we are over the minimum requirements, and I think by a significant number.
Yeah, we are.
It's looked better, that's why I was asking the question.
Right.
Yeah, we're required to have, whatever the number is, two per unit, I think it is. We have 74 total, including the garages. So we have 22 driveways, obviously, with the 22 units, and then we have 30 on-street parking spaces scattered throughout that are convenient to all the units.
It's about 3 per unit, 3.5 per unit?
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, it sounds good to say they won't be parking on that road. If somebody has a party, there'll be people there who don't live there, they've never been there before, they're just going to park wherever they feel like. I don't know how that gets enforced. You're going to call the police, or someone going to call the police, or they're going to call the tow wagon to tow them away, or what's going to happen?
Well, we will deal with that in site plan, and if a covenant's required to the village, then we'll make sure that they have enforcement authority. Okay, we have Mr. Eschbacher from VHB who can talk to you about the traffic.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Robert Eschbacher with VHB. I'm a principal in the Traffic Engineering Division. What I'd like to do is touch upon some of the traffic-related aspects concerning the amended plan that's been presented to you this evening, and also address some of the comments and questions that were raised by you back at the October hearing for this application. First, with regard to the revised plan, Mr. Walsh has gone through some of the changes with you. There are several that relate directly to traffic. First of all, the number of driveways out onto Hill Street is being reduced from 2 until 1, and that one driveway will be located in the center of the site. So by having a single driveway, we are eliminating some of the conflict points that you would otherwise have with 2 driveways and various turns being made in and out. So we're addressing that. Another important part of the having a single driveway and placing it in the center of the site is that we're moving it away from the driveways for the adjoining properties, thereby further minimizing any conflicts you might have there. And there's also a minor reduction in the traffic generation by reducing the number of units on the site by 1. So that's a number of very important benefits from the new plan. What I'd like to do now is go through some of the comments that were made back in October and elaborate upon some of the information we've developed in connection with that. And I have a detailed response that I'll be submitting to as well. One of the major types of questions that came up was with regard to traffic generation. How many trips are going to be generated by this, when, and so on. So what I'd like to do first is just give you an idea of how we go about developing trip generation projections. They're not based on guesswork or based on hunches. They're based on actual quantitative data that has been collected based on actual operating developments. Traffic engineers throughout the country have compiled the information, and it's been published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. That's the national organization representing our profession, similar to the AMA, American Bar Association. And this standard resource reference that has been prepared is called the Trip Generation Manual. This manual contains information on a wide variety of land uses. And by going to that, we're able to have this quantitative information on the different types of land uses. For purposes of tonight, what I've done has been to compare the proposed, if you will, 23 units on the site as residential condominiums to what would be permitted as a 67-room hotel on the property. Now, I can tell you, when you look in the reference data, that the number of trips generated per unit for a hotel or for a condominium, in every case, the residential condominium rate is lower. So you have fewer units of traffic being generated by a condo as opposed to a hotel room. And that applies whether it's during the morning peak hour during the week, the afternoon peak hour, Saturday, and also looking at all day on a weekday and a Saturday. And to give you some examples of the very wide difference between these, I'd like to talk briefly about during the weekday afternoon peak hour. This is generally the busiest time of week in terms of traffic flow. If the site were developed with 67 hotel rooms, there would be, during the weekday afternoon peak hour, 47 total trips being generated. 47 is the total of incoming and outgoing trips. By comparison, the 23 condominium units would generate 12 trips. And that broken down would be 8 trips entering the property and 4 leaving. So it's 47 for the hotel and 12 for the condominiums. And to put these numbers in perspective, most importantly with respect to the residential condos, 12 trips during that busy 60-minute afternoon peak hour is equivalent to 1 car traveling along Hill Street every 5 minutes. It's not something you would be able to notice. I certainly can't notice it. But every 5 minutes, there'll be 1 more car traveling along there. And as I said, 8 would be entering, returning back to their units, and 4 would be leaving for other purposes. And the same applies to the other days, other times of the day. It's always more traffic for the hotel than it is for the condos. A question had come up about, do these rates include any visitors, employees, and so on? And the answer is yes. They're all inclusive. They're essentially developed by counting all vehicles that come in, all vehicles that leave, no matter what their purpose is. We're counting vehicles coming in and vehicles leaving. So anybody traveling onto the site would be part of those rates. Another question was regarding the peak hours of the study. First, as you know, the traffic counts that were used in the analysis were collected on a weekday in August from 7 in the morning until 9 in the morning, the busy morning peak period, and from 4 until 6 o'clock in the afternoon, once again, coinciding with the busy peak period. We also did counts on a Saturday in August, and these were done from 10 o'clock in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. And using those numbers, we then analyzed to see out of those 2-hour periods, or in the case of Saturday, 4-hour periods, what is the busiest consecutive 60 minutes during that? And we analyzed our information based on that. So we've taken really the worst case of the busiest month of the year. And the analysis in the traffic impact study shows very clearly that the projected traffic will not have any measurable impact on the traffic conditions on Hill Street. There may be some very slight delays with cars trying to leave the site during some of the peak periods, but they would be minor delays, and those delays would only be encountered by the people living there. They would not affect the traffic flow along Hill Street. Another question that came up was the traffic during the shoulder seasons. And our analysis, once again, looked at the busiest time of year, by definition, is August. If we analyzed during the busiest time of year and determined that there would not be any measurable impact on traffic during the busiest time, it stands to reason that during the less busy times, the shoulder seasons or off-peak, there would be even less of an impact. And finally, questions were raised about parking, including this evening. The latest plan before you shows that there would be 74 parking spaces provided on the site, broken down as 22 in driveways, 22 in garages, and 30 on street. The village code requires 2 per unit, or 44. And the village code is intended to capture what the overall needs would be, including guests and other things. But even if you were to be concerned about perhaps the garage is not being used, then the parking available in the driveways and on street, the 52 parking spaces there, would be greater than what the village code requires, but in actuality, we have 74 altogether.
I thought there wasn't going to be any parking on street.
Excuse me?
I thought there wasn't going to be any parking on street.
On the site. These parking areas shown in the site plan. Scattered throughout the site, those, I'm calling those on street.
All right.
They would not be parked along the street,
All right.
but in those particular areas. So,
And those are for guests, workers?
whatever, exactly, sure. And I can understand there may be cases where some people may choose not to use their garage, but there will be cases where people will use their garage for parking. And in any event, if you exclude them completely, the number of spaces in the driveways and in those other areas will exceed the village code requirements. So I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have. And I will present the detailed responses.
Are you going to be doing the analysis for the fire marshal as far as emergency equipment being able to come in and out of the site? Would that be you?
Mr. Walsh will be doing that. Yeah, we work together on this. Okay, thank you.
Wayne, did you have anything? Hurt your back?
Good evening. I'm reminded of the statement General MacArthur made upon his retirement about old soldiers. Well, this old soldier is not fading away. I have to say, I'm very happy to be before you again.
We haven't seen you in a while.
Pardon me?
It's been a long time since we saw you
It's
last.
been a long time. I'm used to being in Chick's chair, but I'm not. However, it doesn't put me in an adversary position at all. I feel that my role here is to share with you some planning background, which you may know bits and pieces of, and hopefully will help you arrive at a positive decision with respect to this development. I prepared for the record, my name is David Amelita, planning consultant, land use consultant for this project. You should have in your folders a memorandum I prepared dated December 19th, 2017. I'm going to refer to it, not in huge detail, but there are 5 points I wish to make, and I will just outline them first, and then I'll go through them. The first point I wish to discuss is the current village zoning map. The second point I wish to discuss is the study conducted by the Village Planning Commission in 2016. The third point I wish to discuss is a study commissioned by the Village Planning Board in 1991. The fourth point I wish to discuss is the Village Comprehensive Plan. And finally, the last point I wish to discuss is the Village Planning Board secret findings, which Mr. Gilmartin has already introduced to you, but I think that's a good last statement to button up our arguments about this proposed use being consistent with standard planning and land use theory, and consistent with the Village Comprehensive Plan, and being beneficial to the neighborhood. I'll try not to go too fast. This material to me is elemental in my many years of practicing planning, and so I'll try not to go too fast so you can grasp it. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask. I'm not here to lecture. I'm here to explain more than anything else. So if you have, I hope you have that memorandum before you.
What's the date of that, David?
December 19th, 2017.
Board members have that?
Buried in here, so that's good.
Not in there?
It probably is, I gotta,
Oh, well, okay. I'll do my best.
Well, let's go.
I did-
Do it. Come on, let's go.
I do have the 1991 study, so you don't have to go back that far. But anyway, the village zoning map, of which there should always be a copy in the hearing room, but there isn't. I'll hold this up, and maybe the camera can find it, or maybe can I put it on the table? Will that do? Am I holding it correct? It should be this way?
No, upside down, facing the board.
Facing the board, okay.
Dave, I think,
Okay.
going forward,
Okay.
in the future, can you get copies for all of us of that in case
I could,
we don't,
yes, yeah,
he doesn't recollect it, and it would be good to have a fresh copy.
okay, let me make a note of that. I don't trust my memory, the old soldier. Okay, so this is the current village zoning map. You will see the properties in question outlined in red. Okay, you will see the village business district, the higher density village business district here. You will see the existing multifamily districts, Whitefield, the former Submergent development, I don't know exactly what it's called, and then over here, the old Irving Hotel. It's not working too well. Okay, but the point I'm trying to make here is the transition from village business to the lower residential densities, the R20 district to the west, is interrupted by the multifamily zones, which the village put those multifamily developments in conforming districts. In other words, what standard land use theory holds and zoning theory holds is that for every community, depending of course on its geography, has its most intense uses at its center and transitions out toward the lower residential districts. Southampton Village does that, adheres to that theory in many ways, dependent on the street pattern and so forth. But in this particular area, you will notice that the Whitefield development is surrounded by R20. So the current village zoning map is not consistent with standard land use planning theory. That's the major point I'm trying to make there.
David, can I just ask you a question? Is that because the MF20 zones appeared after the first zoning map was?
Yes, yes. Each of those was zoned separately, either upon their own, I assume, and my memory
You're talking about Whitefield and Irving,
isn't true, but I assume was as a result of a petition by the owners or developers of those properties. The Merrill Breeze Estate became the Nyack Boys School and then became the Whitefield condominium. The Irving Hotel was destroyed and returned because I guess it was no longer useful as a hotel, a fire hazard. And that multifamily development came about. And then George Submergent's development on Cooper Farm Road was a part of that whole subdivision process. So each of them was an individual attempt to adhere to the standard planning theory of transitioning out from higher density to lower density. But we have this collar, if you will, of R20 around. Can you see it? Yes, that would be in the orange around the Whitefield development, and also encompassing the Village Latch, Terry Cottage, and the Southampton Inn. Elsewhere in the village, surrounding the village core of village business and office, there is a rough transition from higher density to lower density east and southeast of the village, somewhat to the southwest, but you get into the so-called estate district right away, and out toward Hill Street, except for this donut of R20 encompassing the subject properties in the Whitefield development. Now this, the study number 3 that I'm going to refer you to, and I think I have enough copies for everyone and for the board's records. This study was conducted by the Village Planning Board in 1991, stimulated by...
Can you walk through there, there's wires, please?
I'm sorry?
There's wires
Oh,
there.
okay, fine, thank you, thank you. Stimulated by the building inspectors concerned, as I recall, multifamily developments in a hotel in a residential district create some issues with fire code, the state fire code. The Village Planning Board was also concerned about the lack of consistency in zoning in that particular part of the village on those specific properties. Higher density residential developments being zoned R20. It just didn't make any sense. So in 1991, the Village Planning Board conducted a study of those properties to determine what should be done. And coincidentally, I was the author of that study. So I can tell you that 20, 30 years ago, this was recognized as a problem. It was also recognized in the Village Comprehensive Plan. At the time, in 1991, the best available tool to remedy this problem was the recommendation to rezone these 3 properties to motel. This has been discussed off and on through the years, but for one reason or another, never fully accomplished. There was a recent attempt to zone motel, I think on this property a few years ago. I was not involved with it, so I'm not totally familiar with the details. But there was an underlying concern that these properties are not correctly zoned. They're multifamily developments or commercial lodging or higher density residential developments zoned for half-acre residents. It just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't hold. This diagram was taken from that 1991 study showing the 3 properties, Terry Cottage, the Latch, and the Southampton Inn, recommended for motel development. Again, best tool available at the time. Next to last, I'm showing you a page, the future land use plan of the village from the Village Comprehensive Plan. And the comprehensive plan, recognizing the commercial residential nature of the lodging facilities on these 3 parcels, again, Southampton Inn, Village Latch, and Terry Cottage, the village's own comprehensive plan recommended motel development, again, to establish this transitional zone from the Central Village Core Village Business Office District out toward the R20 outlying districts. So even the village's own planning document says the current zoning, the current R20 zoning is not appropriate. And at that time, and it may need to be looked at again, the MTL district was recommended.
For all 3 properties, David?
Pardon me?
The MTL zone was recommended for all 3 properties?
It was. The village plan recommended MTL district for all 3 properties. Let me.
And that was the 91 study that you're referring to?
That was the 2000 Village Comprehensive Plan.
But your study in 1991 was recommending it be MTL as well?
MTL as well, yes, because that was thought, in 1991, that was the best available tool. I was not involved in the Village Comprehensive Plan, and so I couldn't tell you the exact rationale, except to recognize the commercial residential nature of those 3 properties, lodging, hotel and lodging, as opposed to single-family half-acre residential. Obviously, there's something wrong when you have those 3 properties zoned R20. It's just not correct zoning. Finally, upon the application of this proposed development in its SECRA proceedings, the village planning board, your own planning board with your own expert planner and board, of course, determined that the change in non-conforming use from rooming house and inn to an attached residential community would be beneficial. So not only is it consistent with zoning theory in terms of an appropriate density in transitioning out from the center, but it would also be beneficial to the neighborhood. The planning board's report goes on to state, and I will just summarize, I will just read his finding and then end my presentation. The planning board finds that the proposed use of the subject property for multifamily residential development is compatible with surrounding land uses and is appropriately located as a transitional use between the downtown commercial core and the less dense single-family residential neighborhoods that are located to the north, south, and west, and parens beyond this immediate area. Furthermore, the density of development is compatible with other multifamily residential developments within the village, the MF districts I referred to earlier. And then, subject to the granting of the required variances, such as they are, no significant adverse impact to land use or zoning will result. So, from that historical perspective that I offered you, up to last September, excuse me, your own planning board recognizes that the R20 zoning is not appropriate, that the existing development proposal is appropriate, and it will not create an adverse impact on the neighborhood, but will in fact be beneficial. So I hope I have convinced you of those points, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
The question I have, has to do with the density. How, the density right now being proposed is...
About 4.6 to the acre, something like that.
Yeah, so now we're at 75,000 square feet on 4.48 acres, compared to the adjacent Whitefield, which is 88,000 square feet, but on 16 acres. I understand what you're talking about as far as transitioning out of the business, but why would it be a good idea for this area to have roughly similar square footage as an area 4 times the size? In other words, why do we have so much density here? I'm not disagreeing with your points about multifamily usage. What my concern is 75,000 square feet on 4.5 acres versus the next adjacent property, 88,000 square feet on 16 acres.
Okay, that's a fair question. But you have to look at the bigger picture. You have to look at the village center, village business office district, transitioning down in density. The Whitefield complex is west of these properties, and so the fact that it is of lesser density makes sense.
Oh, I'm not even saying that, that it shouldn't be slightly more density, because we're talking about a transition. What I'm talking about is what appears to be roughly 4 times the density.
Well, you could say, you might be able to say, I'm not going to say you would say, but you might be able to say the same about the other MF developments, that they are of higher density than Whitefield. You have to remember what Whitefield was before. It was an estate. It was the Merrill Breeze estate, from Merrill Lynch. It was the classic house in the middle, and then it became the Nyack Boys School, and I don't remember the exact configuration of the buildings on the Nyack Boys School. It may or may not have been what's there now, but the developer at the time chose that density. And the village agreed. I believe Mayor Wines was mayor then, and he agreed, that the village board agreed that that was a good zone for that property. They may have been able to convince the village for more density, but they didn't. So they got what they got. The existing development density is what it is. It's pre-existing non-conforming, 67 units. So it's already there. That density is already there.
But I don't look at, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. I look at just square footage. It's confusing for me to look at units, because 67,000 units that are an average of, how large are the units?
I don't know. I don't have.
I'm just looking at square footage. I'm just looking at square footage. Because units is confusing. Units could mean anything. Okay, these are 3,500 square foot condominiums.
Okay, I know the numerics you're speaking of, but in terms of zoning, in terms of land use, it's the residential density in terms of dwelling units that is regulated, not necessarily the square feet. In terms of lot coverage, yes, square feet. But in terms of the dwelling unit count, that's what zoning regulates.
No, I mean, lot coverage is also, that could be another number. I'm impressed recently by how much the village in general has been concerned with the gross floor area calculations throughout the village.
Okay. Yeah.
So why here are we throwing out any concerns about gross floor area when throughout the balance of the village, we're actually now in the process of reducing gross floor area per acre or per size of the property even more? And then here we're going to have, at a focal point of the village, a very high density of square footage compared to acreage.
Okay, Mr. Greenwell, I don't have at my fingertips, because this is not my area of the project, the existing square footage that's on the property now of all the structures. I would ask one of my team members to try to answer that question, comparing the total square footage that's on the property now versus the square footage that's being proposed, the lot area that's on the existing, pre-existing non-conforming lot area as opposed to the lot area or lot coverage that's proposed. It seems that it would have been raised before the planning board if the planning board had a similar concern, or this board was an involved agency in that process. If that question wasn't asked then, I don't know why it wasn't asked then.
Are you suggesting I missed my chance to...
Pardon me?
I missed my chance to raise the issue?
Well, you didn't miss your chance, but that may have been the chance to put it in a total context. As I say, I don't have those numbers at my fingertip. This wasn't my charge of the project to microanalyze the site itself. My charge was, as former village planner, to put this into context. Does this project work with standard land use planning theory? And that points to the consistency of the existing village zoning with standard land use planning theory. As we see, it is not.
That information is in the first chart on the, that we gave you. So there's a full-on comparison of us to the other condominiums in the area.
No, what David was suggesting was, well, you would know. What's the comparison between the village lot square footage and this square footage?
Of the village latch and...
Square footage and the proposed square footage.
What's the current? It's 25,815 square feet. I would say that and qualify it with, if you look at the finding statement, the planning board found the present site to be underutilized. So they're saying that 25,000, could have, should have, would have been higher. So, it's hard to, I think you can't take something that's static and make a comparison.
Well, I'm comparing, we're talking about whether this is a beneficial change, and what I'm suggesting is, and I agree that arguably it's a beneficial change to have multifamily versus motel. What I'm asking is, do you think...
Single family.
Or versus single family.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Arguably, I'm not saying I agree with that. But would you argue that it is beneficial to go from 25,000 square feet to 75,000 square feet? Would it be beneficial, from your perspective as a planner, to triple the square footage on these 4.4 acres?
As I mentioned before, the land use planning and zoning rely on dwelling unit counts, not simply square footage. So in order to provide sufficient floor area for each dwelling unit, including garages, whatever other accessory buildings, one then arrives at that figure. That figure wasn't picked out of thin air. It was derived from a site plan and from, as I say, minimum floor areas, appropriate floor areas for to make this use an economic development, to redevelop the properties, to get rid of the substandard structures, and to maintain the two historic structures in the front. So there has to be a give and take.
Absolutely.
This procedure in the zoning code is probably the best one to deal with, because you have gone through the secret findings, and you yourself have more power to regulate a specific land use than the village would over a straight change of zone. You can dot the i's and cross the t's on what happens here. I think the square footage itself may seem unusual, it may seem to you, and that's fine, But I'm saying that wasn't reached for, that was derived. And if you find it's inappropriate, you must make a discrete finding as to why that is the case. Why is that tripling a bad thing? In order for your findings to make sense, to stand up. And I respect what you're saying, but it wasn't just picked out of thin air, it was derived from the site plan.
I look at also,
Yes, Dan.
you talk about the transition, you could take the same comparison to Southampton Inn, which is like a hotel with the traffic that flows in and out of there, the amount of people that flow in and out of there, the amount of land usage per the size of the lot. This development is less than that development.
It's less than that development. That development is closer to the core.
And Whitefield is spread out
Yeah.
farther. So
Yes.
your point is that as you get further out, the density is in closer, and it goes to less dense and more single-family the further out you go.
Yes. Because the core of any community, whether it's New York City or even Watermill, it's right in the middle is where all the action is where the traffic is where people walk. That's just the way communities develop. And Southampton is no different. It's tempered, of course, by the street pattern, by the drainage patterns, by the ponds and lakes, and all of that. Most other sectors of the village that radiate from Main Street and Hampton Road do transition out fairly well, except right here. You have this circle of R20 around Whitefield, and in that circle are 3 currently commercial residential developments, one of which wants to become conforming to a multifamily residential and not a transitional lodging. It wants to become more conforming to the other MFPRDs that the village has already blessed, only by a different mechanism, the particular section in the village code, as opposed to a straight zoning map amendment, which I said before gives you better control. Any other questions? Yes, Rob?
I think it's a little tough to compare density and such with the Whitefield condominium. It's an outlier. It's a statistical outlier. The average, if you remove that one, the average of all the other condominiums are 4.7, which is right where this one is.
Yes.
So it's very difficult to compare it to Whitefield. It's a gem. It's not going to be repeated unless somebody puts in more stuff, maybe 50 years from now, that'll be crowded. Who knows?
There's nothing, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, I'm done.
Okay, there's nothing stopping the Whitefield condominium from coming in for another zoning change, for intensifying that property. They can try to do that.
I think when that was built, it was aimed at a specific customer. People who had estates. They wanted to get out of the estate section, tired of paying maintenance, pool maintenance, landscaping, and get into that, and they wanted to make it look more like an estate.
I think that's a fair assessment, and I think that's reasonable.
I'm talking about 40 years ago.
Yeah, yes, and I think it's still reasonable today. I think you'll see, my parents might have wanted to do that too, but it didn't eventuate that way. My mom came to live with us after my dad died. We were fortunate we could take her in, but many other families don't have that opportunity. So the original couple age in place, the kids leave, they want to stay in Southampton. I don't want to live in this 4-bedroom house. I want something smaller. So I think you'll still see, and you do still see proposals for multifamily development, not unlike this, on properties that can be redeveloped like this. And if it's a straight change of zone, that's one thing, or if it's a reuse of a pre-existing non-conforming use, that's something else. But those mechanisms are there. This happens to be the best application of the village code for this property. And I would say that if I were on your side, because that's what I believe. Really, that's what I believe. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Greenwald, if I could just make two observations which I think may help. The current lot coverage ratio is 13.22%. When and if completed, the lot coverage will be 19.61%. There's a lot made of the Whitefield to the west, but I think we also have to look to the east and the Southampton Inn, which has a lot coverage ratio of 20.35% and a floor area ratio of 33.05%. And our floor area ratio, we have two different numbers. We have the Latch and the Terry Cottage, you'll see on there. If it's the Latch and Terry Cottage, that's 35.76% and 38.58. So understand it gets 90 units to our east as we go west, and then Whitefield, which I agree is an outlier, but I think you have to consider both of those properties instead of concentrating on the Whitefield property. I'd ask Michael Dubb to come up. He's going to talk about the landscaping, and then I'd like the opportunity just to address the village law balancing test quickly.
Good evening. Michael Dubb, Beechwood Organization. I'm going to try and be respectful of your time. I have a lot I want to say. I'll try and get it in quick, and I want to address a couple of issues that you raised. Number one, I'm a lifelong Long Islander. I have had a house in West Hampton for 20 years. I'm vested in this area. We're not hit-and-run type of builders. We're not from another area. We are part of the community, and obviously we respect the community. In the 30-plus years I've been doing this, I've learned a few things. Early on, I learned that 98% of the land on Long Island, virgin land, had already been developed for housing. And in Suffolk County, the number's kind of like around 95%. So what I've had to do for my 30-plus years of doing this is I've had to look at existing uses and see how they can be repurposed and made better. And so that's really what I built a career on doing. Now, we can opine on the architecture of Bishop's Pond, but the fact of the matter was it was a blight on the community, and we turned it into something that serves a purpose. And a little to what you were alluding to, those of us, and I'm in my 60s, who have lived on Long Island, we've raised our family, we've paid our taxes, and we want to stay in our communities. And when you do a community like this, and I'm going to go to Bishop's Pond, yeah, we get people who want to come here, want to have summer homes, but we've also, and we had this at Bishop's Pond, and I knew it would be successful right away, we had people coming from Southampton who wanted this type of housing. If you want to go buy a house on a half acre or an acre, you have thousands of opportunities to do it. But if you want to live in a community like this, and you want to stay in the area, and you don't want the responsibility of the house shoveling the snow and the basement flooding and the roof, this type of community is needed. And just to beat a dead horse a little bit, so we built Bishop's Pond, completed it 4 or 5 years ago. The values of the homes there have nearly doubled in that time. I don't think the values of homes in the rest of the town have doubled because of the need for this. So these things that we are concerned about, let me address them. I'm a previous volunteer fireman. So when you ask about the fire marshal, that's my mind is fire. I'm always thinking of how are people getting out of the house in the fire. How are the fire trucks getting in? I was a ladder guy. We're not going to not pay attention to having the proper fire access. And one of the most challenging agencies we deal with is the fire marshal. I know what we have to do. It has to be addressed. In terms of your concern about parking, there are ways to address additional parking. Now, correctly, you guys sit here and, you have the interest of the community, the best interest at heart. So I bring my experts up and they go, well, I've met this, I've met that, I've met this, I've met that. But then there's reality. So when you're concerned about parking, there are things that I can do to create more parking spots. And I'll show you, I'm not very good at this because I'm not an engineer or just a builder, but within this area, I have an island here. I can cut parking spots into the island. Is this showing up? Okay. We show one-car garages. I actually like to give a second driveway pad in front of each house when I can, so that if there are two cars and concern about people not using their garages, the second car doesn't wind up in the street. I can actually take the clubhouse footprint and raise it up to the second floor and put parking under the clubhouse and have a beautiful deck overlooking the pool. So these are all things I can do. What I really want to emphasize is in the 30-plus years I've been doing this, I've never left a community worse for wear, never hurt the property values, would never propose something that is an obnoxious use or what I wouldn't want next to me. If I lived in Whitefields, and again, Whitefields is an anomaly because most of the other communities that were approved since then are at a similar density and a similar zoning. If I lived in Whitefield, I would not be offended by this. But again, I don't live in Whitefield, and I'm sure there are people who will speak for that. So, I want you to know my son Stephen has been with me for 10 years. He's proven to be a great boss. This is what we do. We're not here to, be difficult on the village. We consider ourselves members of the village. So ask me any questions you want, because I can present a whole crew of great experts, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with me. Anything?
Well, some of the questions I brought up was because you're concerned on it.
Yeah.
You're concerned about safety, after it's built, after people are living there, can the emergency vehicles get in there? Is there enough parking? Is it going to be a problem? Is there going to be a traffic problem? This is the only chance we get to examine it.
Yeah.
So that's,
well, like I said, there's what meets code, but if there's a level of satisfaction I can give you beyond that, I'm happy to do that. And, I just wanted to share with you some of the thought process I had. I knew with Whitefield there was a concern of what the original application had, a 25-foot setback in the rear yard. We moved it to 35. Of all the things I was supposed to talk about was my landscaping background. I actually started out as a landscape contractor. So right now what you have between us and Whitefield is a very mature privet hedge, but the problem is it's deciduous, so you see through it in the month of March. When you look at the plant material we would plant along there to create, a green buffer, and obviously I'm familiar with the plant material that does best in the environment. I think the fastest growing evergreen out in this area is cryptomeria, but there are plenty of cedars. And, if there's concerns about height of plant material even starting out, I'm happy to address that. I think with landscaping, I also think by moving 35 feet off the property line, some of the mature trees that were questionable can now remain. So I think it's a good improvement. So I'm here to answer any questions, and I just want to thank you guys for your time.
I do have one question, and he addressed it about all the stormwater being contained on the site, plus all the septic is going to be on the site. Do you have a plan that shows us how that's going to be, how you're going to do that?
That's a big deal these days. I mean, not just your site, virtually any site I do, but I'll let Kevin show to take you
Yeah,
through.
and this is admittedly conceptual because the final engineering hasn't been done yet, but we've done enough to know that we can fit, yeah, that helps too. Let me flip it around. Yeah, so this is good, maybe a little bit better, a little bit easier to follow. What we've done here is we've incorporated the septic systems exactly as they would be designed. The drainage system we designed kind of as a whole for the property. We end up with 23 dry wells required. Will we need 23 dry wells? I suspect it will be less because at the end of the day,
That's for road and roof?
That's road, roof, landscaped areas, 100% of the site. So we know we can fit 23 on here, but at the end of the day, I think we can go a little deeper, and if the grading shifts around a little bit, we can consolidate some of those. So this is worst case.
And those are going to be just the conventional concrete rings that
Dry
you're
wells.
buried?
That's correct, right. Yeah, we've got better than 25 feet to groundwater, so we have plenty of room to do that.
Kevin, what do the colors represent?
The colors are, the orange is the dry wells, the drainage system. The green is the IA systems, the innovative alternate systems, which consist of it's not a septic tank, but it takes the place of a septic tank, but it's a treatment chamber, okay? And then a leaching pool for each one of those and a location, because the health department requires it, for an additional leaching pool if it's ever required. So we've designed that into the layout.
But they require spacing from...
And that's exactly the way this is laid out.
It meets all the spacing requirements?
Absolutely, yes. And then the blue is the water main, which serves the entire property. And then we, because we don't have control essentially over gas and electric and things like that, we do provide a corridor through the property where you can put the gas, electric, cable, telephone, all that kind of stuff. And that's typically the way we lay these things out.
If it's any small comfort to you, Bishop's Pond has the same system of rings. And when I was building Bishop's Pond, I was a little concerned because, as you know, when you go into Bishop's Pond, you actually go down into a little bit of a valley, but it was designed with the same system, and it's worked, perfectly well there.
And from what I've seen, the soil borings, the soils are good here.
Yeah, usually you hit sand pretty quick.
Yeah, usually. And we have a decent depth to groundwater, so we've got a lot to work with. Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I have an image in my head of getting out of there, making a left turn. Especially at 5:30 or 8:30, I just have an image that's difficult to do. And there's no way around it. That is, you're not going to make a right to come back around and go left, so it's not a question, it's just a nagging thought. And then people do stupid things when they can't get in. Then they nose in, they nose into the lane and become aggressive.
Unfortunately, there are people trying to make left-hand turns up and down Hill Street to get into town.
Yeah,
and I watch
what are they going to do with them? I don't know.
And it's worth pointing out, I guess, that will be a lot fewer of them with this project than there are with the hotel use.
Well, that's debatable. I don't know how busy that hotel was.
Well, one thing, I'd mentioned is I respect the beauty of those two buildings and what they mean, and I'm really anxious to get those things restored to the grandeur that they once were. So at least they'll look the right way.
Okay.
I'll tell you, the other plan, it really bothered me that all the buildings, you needed so much setback relief that you pulled all this and you met the setbacks.
Yeah. I think it'll give me a nice layout for a house, too. So I'm here if you have any questions. Thank you for your time, gentlemen.
At the risk of trying your patience more, I'll just run quickly through the village law balancing test. Obviously, the benefit to Beechwood is clear that they'll have the opportunity to do that. I also think that there's a benefit to the village, and that benefit was laid out in the finding statement, which found that this project, if approved, would eliminate an illegal overuse of the property, put in adequate infrastructure, resolve the concerns about groundwater and surface water, provide a use that's compatible with the surrounding area, provide permanent patrons to the village business, enhance property values, and maintain the character of the village through the retention of the Terry Cottage and village lot. With respect to the character of the neighborhood, I think that this fits. If you take a look at, actually, here is Whitefield, here's the Village Latch, and this is Southampton Inn. As you look around here, these are, and we have the Cooper's Farm, MFPRD. If you look around, this will be within the character of the neighborhood. It's certainly a densely built-up area. So the planning board did find that. They found that it was consistent with the area, and through the retention of the Terry Cottage and the village latch building, which will remain in place and be rehabbed, that the character of the community will not be affected. There are no alternatives for us. Under this provision of the zoning code, you're the only board that can give us the change from one non-conforming use to another. The substantiality of our request, it's an interesting question because the relief that we asked for has a baseline of the R20. As you heard Mr. Emelita refer to, that this is basically a miszoned area at R20, but we have to meet those requirements under our application. What that doesn't take into account is the non-conforming nature of the current use. So how you need to look at it, is it beneficial to the neighborhood that we remove the village latch use, the commercial use, and go to a residential use? As a board, the law is quite clear in this area. You have to consider the totality of the circumstances. And I'd submit to you that the totality of the circumstances here, the miscast zoning, the retention of the Terry Cottage, the protection of groundwater, all of that taken together, these variances are not substantial. The impact to the environment, you've heard a lot from Mr. Walsh tonight. It's going to be a significant upgrade to retain the groundwater on site and the upgraded septic system. And then the final part of the test is whether there's self-created hardship, and I'd argue not. This is a piece of property that was pre-existing non-conforming, and we're looking to upgrade it significantly. We, again, as you heard, we have everybody here. We can try to answer questions, and we'll sit down and let the public have an opportunity to speak.
Any other comments or questions? Wayne?
Not at this time.
Is there anyone from the public who'd like to be heard? I figured that.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Bruin, Patrick Fife, Toomey, Latham, Shea, Kelly, Dubin, and Quateraro, 51 Hill Street. I will try to be as brief as possible given the hour. Just to begin, Whitefield does appreciate Beechwood's changes, at least to the side setback and the move of the pool and the clubhouse to the east. We did have discussions with them over the course of the last couple of months, and Whitefield is appreciative of those changes and supports them. However, we did make clear in our discussions with Beechwood, as well as I think the last time we were here in front of the board, that Whitefield as a community did have concerns with the project's density in terms of square footage. I realize Whitefield's an outlier. It's understandable. I'm not talking about units, but the square footage GFA lot coverage has not been reduced, at least Whitefield feels, to a level that's more consistent with the village's area zoning requirements for multifamily use, in particular under the MF20 zone. I mean, the real concern Whitefield has here, it's not the change in the use. The concern here is the area variances that are being sought coupled with the change in use. I heard Mr. Gilmartin go through a lot of positive benefits associated with this application, but they're really geared towards just the change of use, not the change of use when paired with what he noted are very substantial area variance request. So when you look at the plan, it calls for, the revised plan calls for significantly more density in I'd call what's the back 2/3 of the property, which is on the opposite side of where Whitefield's home begins. It looks like most of the construction is in that back area, and the intense concentration of the structures in that area and overall on the property is really what Whitefield's concern is, and I'll get into that a little bit more specifically. But certainly I think when viewed from Whitefield's property, even with a 6-foot fence and some landscaping, you in effect see a railroad line of structures. They've been separated on Whitefield's side, but where you don't see the back of a structure, you're going to see the front of a structure on the other side. I mean, it's a very narrow lot that we're dealing with. There's very little room east to west or across this new street between these units. So it is going to be a significant degree of development that's going to be viewed from Whitefield's side. Under the village code, as Mr. Gilmartin said, to grant a change in non-conforming use, the applicant needs to show a change that will be beneficial to the neighborhood. That change needs to be from the current non-conforming use. So what they're proposing now, 23 units, I think equals roughly 70 to 90 bedrooms. I don't believe they've provided any floor plans yet for the units. I haven't seen any. But let's say there's 3 to 4 bedrooms per unit. Certainly that number of rooms is going to be more than the 67 sleeping rooms that last existed at the Latch, which I think we pointed out wasn't the legal number that was permitted to begin with. We submitted a letter back in January 16th, that showed this board's 1975 decision that approved the change in non-conforming use for the Latch property. As a rooming house, only allowed for 37 rooms, not 67 rooms. There was an express condition in that approval that limited it to 37 rooms. The ZBA reaffirmed that in 1993. So I think the appropriate basis for this board to look at when comparing this change, the overall change, not only just the use, but the use with the area variances being sought, is 37 sleeping rooms to what's being proposed, not the 67. That the applicant has essentially based all of its presentation to you on. I think that's very clear. It's not something that was addressed by the planning board in SECRA. For whatever reason, they looked at it at 67. I think that's a plain error. I think you have a right to look at that issue again. And in fact, I don't think, as Mr. Greenwald had said that, or asked, has this board missed its chance to review this? I don't think that's the case. In terms of the SECRA finding statement about whether there was an adverse impact, it said expressly that it was subject to the variances. So the planning board recognized this board's right to review this project under the variance criteria and make an appropriate decision. So I think that you have every right to review this as you would any other variance application that comes before this board. So again, I think the basis of comparison needs to be 37 sleeping rooms to 70 to 90 bedrooms that the applicant's asking for. I think another point, and it was something that I think some of the questions that the board hit on, is that the prior hotel use didn't generate the type of visitors or additional visitors, the types of vehicles and possibly parties, gatherings that this change of use would. You're not going to have the cocktail parties, the family gatherings. People generally used the Village Latch to come and go, visit other people. It was a stopping place, a place to sleep. I think condos will have more people spending time at the property, and I think some of the Whitefield residents and some other residents earlier on in the application submitted some letters to that effect, where they said they really didn't find the current hotel use or rooming house use objectionable. And I think it was even interesting to note that Mr. Emilita's presentation tonight stated that the village in prior studies has recommended keeping this as a hotel. That's what or hotel use. I mean, that was what was in the comprehensive plan in prior village studies. It didn't recommend multifamily use, and it didn't recommend multifamily use at this level of development, this level of density. And again, that's really the concern. I think if the applicant's going to come here with this proposal to multifamily, it just simply needs to be a more reasonable proposal. I think that the board needs to consider the proposed changes in the context of the requested area variances, and you can't separate the two. You have to look, as Mr. Gilmartin said, at the totality of the circumstances. Look at the application collectively, not piece by piece. So, I mean, you may not feel that a change to multifamily is a bad thing. I think that's certainly a fair point, but here the applicant's seeking multiple area variances on top of that. Area variances for maximum GFA, maximum lot coverage, minimum lot area per dwelling unit, and that does provide a detriment to the nearby properties, in particular Whitefield. As I said, what are they going to be looking at, and what's the degree of density? And it also leads to questions about precedent that I get to. I want to be fair here. I'm not suggesting that the applicant should have to do what Whitefield has on its property. When Whitefield's property was changed to multifamily, I think we provided some evidence of that in the submission I made in January, but the trustees actually in that zoning change required Whitefield to meet the R20 zoning requirements. That was a condition. It wasn't something that I think that the developer, at least based on the record, I obviously wasn't there, but at the time the plan was submitted, I think the trustees made that a condition, said, we'll give you multifamily, but meet the R20. I'm not suggesting that they need to meet the R20 requirements in their entirety, but the applicants effectively come to you and said, change my zoning or change my use to multifamily. I'm not going to comply with R20, and I'm still not going to comply with multifamily, in particular MF20, which I think is a good baseline for this board to use in terms of what should be reasonably appropriate for a multifamily use. And I just don't think that seems fair. At a minimum, I think if you're going to allow a change in use, I think you need to require compliance with the MF20 standards. And looking at those MF20 requirements, I mean, the max GFA under MF20 is 24,923. This proposal is for a whopping 68,250 square feet in terms of GFA. I mean, think about that. That's a substantial precedent. And you heard Mr. Bennett in his first application here tonight talk to you about precedent and you know, that your decisions mean something, and they do. And I think there's certainly a concern that with that substantial an increase in GFA over what MF20 or R20 provide, that's a real concern. I do think it's a very dense development, and we're simply asking you to, and asking the applicant to reconsider and scale it back some. Also, the minimum lot area per dwelling under MF20 for 22 units, I'm not even saying 23 because I know they're carving out the Terry Cottage, but for 22 units, the minimum lot area would be 239,580. This lot's only 195,192 square feet. Lot coverage permitted under MF20, I believe, is 28,826 square feet. Same thing as R20, and the proposal's for 38,280 square feet. So these are substantial jumps, not only over R20, but also over what would be permitted in MF20. And I do think that that is something that the board needs to take into account when evaluating the entirety of this application. So respectfully, from Whitefield's position, if you're going to approve the requested change, I think it needs to be done within the appropriate framework of multifamily area zoning requirements. A couple other just points, very quick, I wanted to just mention. If the board is inclined to approve something here, hopefully a smaller version, and that the applicant will come back with a reduced density, we would request some strict covenant and restriction for the rear yards of each unit. I think I mentioned this at the last hearing. I don't even remember if it was October, November, whenever I was here last. We appreciate the applicant's representation that nothing's going to be built in the backyard and that they modified the first plan that they had come to you with, but I think we want a strict covenant that says no structures, no decks, no pools, lighting.
No hot tubs.
No hot tubs. I mean, I think based on where it appears they're proposing to put the septic systems, that probably will avoid a concern. But I think it would be appropriate to have a covenant and restriction. I heard talk about bylaws. Bylaws aren't enough. I know I've lived in a condo before. People break the bylaws all the time, and condo communities are usually, it's very difficult for them to even enforce them against their own residents, and I think having the village's ability to enforce that would really help things in this instance. I'd also like to see an updated landscaping plan. I appreciate Mr. Dubb's comments about the plan to install more landscaping. It is something that we did talk to Beechwood about, and I think they were receptive. In fact, based on what he said, it seems they're absolutely receptive. But I know my clients would like to see at least an actual plan. I know they had some concerns about what would be planted and would it have any potential issue with the hedge that's there. That, is there, not my area of expertise, but they wanted to have someone look at it and say, is what's being planted there potentially going to cause damage or destroy their hedge? That's all on that point. Lastly, I just ask that on this application, given I haven't had a chance to look at the consistency plan, I don't think I saw Mr. Emolita's report that he referred to in the record. It appears you may not have received it either, but I'd like an opportunity to review that and just ask that you leave the record open for the purpose of just further comment on those. And there were also some individuals I know from Whitefield who did want to come tonight, but were unable to do so as a result of the weather. So if you would leave the hearing open for another evening, I would appreciate that.
Would you suggest smaller units or less units or both?
It's not a matter of units, really. I think it's a matter of size. I mean, I think the units, it's really, I think Mr. Greenwald hit on it in terms of looking at it. I think the number of units is going to be a byproduct of size, but I think you just have too much density here. Maybe it is a reduction in some more units, but I'm not here to say X number of units is appropriate. I don't think that's the way you analyze something like this. I think you analyze it from the GFA, the lot coverage, and coming up then with a plan, and that yields the number that you have.
About the backyards, or whatever we're calling them, what do you think are appropriate developments for the backyard? Do you think people should be able to use the back?
Well, I think that they proposed that they... No, I think...
You don't believe they should go in the back of their expensive townhome, I'm sure, and have some sort of quality of life outside? Patio, whatever?
I think they're proposing to put the patios on the side. Which seems to be more appropriate here, given the degree of density that you're putting in. And they also are still...
Wait, density, I'm not sure density is hurting it.
Well, they also are still seeking an overall side yard relief. Between the two, they're only at 70, and it's required to be 80.
I know, but I'm talking about the individual people living in the individual units. They're going to pay a whole lot of money for these things and not be able to use their back at all, even though landscaping plans have gone in and everything else, and they are 100 and some feet away, and some of their vision isn't that good anyway. What the heck? I mean, what are they supposed to do in their backyard?
Well, I think given the number of homes that you would have here, even under a reduced plan, that, we are still talking, it is R20. They're not seeking a change of zone, they're seeking a change of use. I mean, you wouldn't have that many backyards under any as of right R20 development up against that area, and they wouldn't be that close because these are side yards. They're side yard setbacks. So I think it's appropriate to put the backyard. I mean, I'm sorry, the patios where they're proposing to locate them now. I think the latest plan, I know the last plan they submitted to you maybe back in October, November, had marked out the locations of the patios, and I believe they were planning on putting them on the sides of the units, and I don't think that has changed. But I do think because this is technically a side yard and you're going to have a substantial number of units there, there should be restrictions on what you could build in that area.
I have a question for David. Are you going to have floor plans that we'd be able to see?
Well, what I can tell you is the floor plans haven't been drawn up, but they're three-bedroom units. So there's a total of 66 bedrooms that are going to be proposed. We did a count of
So they're all
current-
three-bedroom, all the units are
All
three-bedroom?
units three bedrooms. So this will be 66 bedrooms. We did a count. We found 62 units with 84 beds and 62 baths. And that analysis, it identifies the structure, and then...
My experience is that people don't use all their bedrooms, so, it's not like there are going to be 66 bedrooms used every single day of the year,
I had a
What's the square
discussion...
footage, what's the square footage on each of these units?
They're approximately 3,500 square feet per unit.
So, but wait, so these are... David, are you suggesting these are 3,400 square foot units plus finished lower levels and only 3 bedrooms?
Yes. Well, the lower level is going to be a basement.
Yeah, but people put bedrooms down in the basement.
We're not putting the bedrooms.
So no bedrooms down in the basement. Okay.
So you have egress windows from the basement?
Can't be used as having...
If you're going to have egress windows, you can end up having a bedroom.
No, we actually, I think code now requires egress windows, whether the basement is finished or not, but, because it used to be these little windows, but we will not be finishing the basements, and we will not be building bedrooms down there. That's the owners could finish.
That's what we're concerned about in the future. If an owner buys a unit and has
Yeah.
a basement, and you have egress windows, he could put a bedroom or convert that to whatever.
Yeah, I hear you. If an egress window is not, and again, I'm not, the codes sometimes vary from town to town. It was my understanding egress window was code now. It used to not be.
Well, it's an area way to also, because then you have the area way and you have the ladder and you have the, you're not doing that. You're not putting in the ladders and the...
No, I'll restrict that in the condominium rules, if that works for you. But just to touch on the bedroom situation for a second, when I identify a project, I have a target market, and a project like this, my target market is empty nesters. And that is, as I said earlier, people who may live in this area, want to downsize. And so I typically, as an empty nester, I have several bedrooms in my house, and I visit them once in a while to make sure the windows aren't open. That's my target market. It's not to say that we won't have some buyers who are young with families and they'll fill up the bedrooms, but it's not the, it's not the target market. The other thing that I wanted to address, if I could, on the units at Whitefield that are close, that face us, these are the fronts of their houses. And so if you drive by Whitefield or look at it, the fronts of their houses virtually have no windows that face this way. People will see our community, only when they're getting in and out of their cars and walking to their cars for the most part, because these units were designed around the beautiful backyard area. And the other thing I wanted to point out is the distance between these units. And in these Whitefield units, the garages are actually pulled forward. It varies from unit to unit. So the living area actually starts beyond these measurements. But it's 127 feet from front to back, 120 feet, 116 feet. That's a lot size. In a subdivision, you could practically build another house in between this area. And just to emphasize, I absolutely will meet with them and attempt to satisfy them on landscaping, and I understand their concerns. So hopefully I've answered your questions.
So you touched on something that was my concern, and it had to do with density. If it's a 3,500 square foot house, but you're only using you're only having 3 bedrooms in the 3,500 square
Right.
feet.
Well, one thing within that 3,500 square feet is the garage, and that takes up some space. And not every unit is 3,500 square feet. I really...
Some are smaller.
The maximum is 3,500 square
Right.
feet. Some are smaller. I try to, as a builder, I try to have different things for different people and different price points. So not every unit is 3,500 feet. But, again, my target market here is somebody who might be moving from a 5,000 or 6,000 foot house.
There's something I want to add on the size too. When we've talked to who we think our target...
Identify yourself for the record.
Stephen Dubb, Beechwood Organization, 200 Robbins Lane, Jericho, New York. We think our target market consists of people who live in the estate section of the village, or a good portion of them. And from the people we've talked to who are interested in moving here, they want larger houses. They're moving out of very, very large houses. And exchange emails with Southampton Association. I think they put forward a number in an email for an average unit size that started with a 4. We felt that was too large for condominiums, but certainly understood the sentiment in it, which was that they were looking for, while they're downsizing, they don't want to feel like they're in too tight of a home. And that kind of goes along with the trend that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years, where homes generally have gotten larger. So at 3,500 square feet with 3 bedrooms, it seems like a lot of extra house, but that'll be, the proportions will be fairly generous compared to the existing condo product. And the only reason I would say that that's necessary is there's demand for newer condominium product in the village. The existing product was built in the 1979, in the 80s, in the 90s, and what people want in a home has changed since then. Unfortunately for us, for comparison of square footage to those, they want larger homes. And the only other thing I would add... I don't mean
to interrupt you, but I don't disagree with you about that. What I'm seeing in comparison with what the village has been doing is you can no longer, with the new GFA laws, get a 3,500 square foot house on a half acre. Mm-hmm. Get your own half acre. Okay, your GFA law, when you do the calculation, is under 3,500 square feet. Mm-hmm. So that's how I was reacting to this. I'm saying, wait a second, in the village as a whole, if you have a half acre, the village doesn't want you to have 3,500 square feet. But here, we're going to have 70,000 square feet on 4.5 acres. It just wasn't, there was something inconsistent about that. So when you're saying 3 bedrooms and 3,500 square feet, again, in 3,500 square feet, you can fit 5 bedrooms, and they're sizable. So there's just something to me that it seems like you have a lot of density here, but maybe you don't need it. Maybe there's something in your square footage calculations. The garage is part of it. But it seemed like a lot of density here. Maybe it isn't as dense as it's being presented.
And floor plans would have been nice. I mean, even though I know you haven't developed all your plans, but, floor plans gives us a sense.
Let me give you...
Increase the number of bedrooms, they're going to have a parking problem.
Let me give you...
That's why I think they got 3 bedrooms.
Let me give you...
2 parking spaces.
When I get to the empty nester, let me give you the layout of the house. You don't have a floor plan, but I can tell it to you. Master bedroom down, couple of bedrooms upstairs.
2.
Yeah. People want to live, our target buyer wants to live on the ground level, have a couple of bedrooms upstairs for when the grandkids come to visit them. So while it sounds like a lot of space, when you put the master bedroom downstairs and you put the bathroom and the spacious kitchen, and now everything is wide open, and you factor in a garage, it goes pretty quick. That, I'm just, I'm not here to debate, I'm just trying to...
No, it sounds much more reasonable.
Yeah.
Were you covenanting not to build out the lower levels with bedrooms, or
No, I won't build out the lower levels. I'll put a covenant in there.
that the
Yeah,
lower
I
level
mean-
won't be usable,
Right, that it won't be
habitable?
I think our buyers would like usable space, but certainly no problem covenanting not to put a bedroom down there. And to your
They might
point,
want to, like a game room or a pool?
Yeah, exactly.
movie room,
It's
place for the husband to go when he's in trouble.
I understand the 3,500 square feet. What bothers me is the number of units. I think there's just way too many units. I mean, you reduced it by one, well, okay, you reduced it, but
Well,
I realize you have to aim at a point where you're going to make money on this. I
Yes.
understand that. An awful lot of expense here. I mean, just, you got a team here tonight of 5 or 6.
Yeah, it's making me
I'd like to
sick.
see that bill, just for one item.
it's making me sick, don't. So, we thought, and I really respect our neighbors. I mean, they were pioneers. That was the first project done just to the west of us. We thought we were in line with what had been done. I mean, you could split numbers here and there in the other multifamily developments within the community across the street. And that's what our understanding was. But, we're here to listen.
Well, if you see Whitefield as an outlier, and let's
Yeah.
see it as an outlier, and you're still at the high end of, I mean, you will represent the high end. I mean, so, perhaps there's a way to come in closer to Irving.
Okay.
I mean, but seeing the floor plans would help. Some reduction along those lines, but I can understand how Whitefield is a bit of an outlier, but you're still substantially larger than Irving and larger than Cooper's Farm.
So just 2 points I want to make. What Rooney reminded me of is that only 10 of the units are 3,500 square feet. The rest are smaller. And then the units that may be larger would be the Terry Cottage to the extent it's listed in there because it's an existing building. We've got no control over that. And the Village Latch. So that may skew the numbers. The average is a little higher, where otherwise they wouldn't have been if you just looked at what we're proposing to build new. And I do think when you look at the density and square footage built per acre and FAR of the Irving and Cooper's Farm, of Bishop's Pond and Enclave, those are in the 25, 30s. I think one of them is up into the 40s in terms of FAR, and we're solidly in the middle in the 30s. Same thing with square footage per acre, where in the ballpark compared to Irving, Cooper's Farm, Bishop's Pond, and Enclave. So, little unfair to just compare us to Whitefield, since the square footage per acre of Whitefield's is less than half.
No, I agreed with that, but it's also not particularly fair to compare this to Bishop's Pond because you're not replacing what was at Bishop's Pond, which the community,
one-car garage,
had a different
right?
feeling
So
about.
that's like, 220 square feet of the 3,500 square feet or whatever, or was that?
Little bit larger. We wanted to make them generous so that people could pull a car in comfortably and then have the storage that they put in a garage.
Yeah, so what do you, 300, so if you have
But we hear you.
35, you actually have 3,200 square foot floor, that's
We can come back with
living area.
We can come back with floor plans. And we hear you.
That would give us a better understanding of
Even with my glasses.
Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard from the public?
I just had a question for them, because I'm not clear on the GFA versus the garage. Based on the building area tabulation on the site plan, I think the garage is separate. I think on the units that were the 3568,
Well, that's why we want to see
that
a
was
floor plan.
GFA, and then there was an additional garage of 286. So I don't think you would subtract the garage out.
The floor plans would
Yeah.
help us a little.
Okay.
Help us a lot, yeah.
It's a valid question. I have the same question for them to resolve.
Bring the floor plan.
Patrick, while you're here, I just have
Do
one
you have anything
question.
else, David? Or are you finished?
Two quick points, but I'll let Wayne.
I had a question for Patrick while he was up. You mentioned something about Whitefield, when the approval, there was a condition, but obviously you can't rezone with a condition. Was there a covenant or something put on Whitefield that says they cannot ever
I'd have to check.
reach the MF20 density?
I'd have to check. There was a discussion, I think it was Exhibit G, to the letter, the January 16th, which was the transcript from the 1992 ZBA hearing on the Beechwood property, or what is now the Beechwood property, and I think it was
But that was just a discussion.
It was a discussion.
You can go to your client and find out if there's something in their offering plan or a covenant on their property that limits them to...
I will find that out, and I can go back and check, but I believe I also read it somewhere, but I should give you the backup to substantiate that statement, so I agree.
We do have one letter in opposition from Linda Riley, who represents the Southampton Inn. She points out about all the variances that are needed. I don't know whether you talked to the Southampton Inn or not.
Well, I have talked to Linda. I'm a little surprised. Her main concern for the Southampton Inn was the landscape plan. But, it appears that that's grown, and I find it a little ungenerous, if you will. Their criticism, they're a non-conforming lot. They've got 90 units. Their lot coverage, if my calculation is correct, is 20.35%. When we're done, we'll be under 20 at 19. So it seems a little ungenerous to me that they, as a non-conforming lot with a significant use on there, would criticize a residential future use. A couple quick points. I just want to follow up on what Mr. Dubb was saying. We are 116, 107, 27, 120 feet away, the units that we're planning. For context purposes, taking the most restrictive R20 zoning, lot width, minimum lot width requirement is 120 feet. So conceivably, take the lot lines out of the way, there's a lot in between the Whitefield structure and our structure. It's a significant ways away. Again, Mr. Dubb made an excellent point. The orientation of the use of those is to the back. If you look at the aerial photograph, you can see the beautiful area in here, and it faces back. There's significant, significant landscaping in between. And I want to come back to, what's it seems to me the most vexing point that I really got to try and get this board away from. Your charge, is it more beneficial to the neighborhood? There is an attempt to describe the variances that we're looking at. And again, that description is unfair to this process. Beneficial to the neighborhood. Taking the R20 completely ignores and discounts the pre-existing non-conforming use. This was a struggle that the planning board had. If you look at page 15 in the secret, it says, with respect to the zoning, both the existing and proposed uses are non-conforming. Therefore, there is no way to directly compare the proposed use to the bulk and dimensional regulations of the R20 zoning district, as those are meant for single-family homes where the proposed action here is a multifamily use. If I can leave you with one thought, applying the R20 and making some sort of judgment is really unfair to the history and the background of this property. I need you to come to the real analysis that you need to do. Is it beneficial to the neighborhood? And read the finding statement. It's overwhelming. Both Whitefield, Southampton Inn, the Southampton Association, everybody participated in that process, and they came out with an overwhelmingly positive finding statement. We will bring the floor plans, and we'll be happy to come back and discuss it further at your next meeting.
Before we close, do we have any other comments? Yes, please come up.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dee Dee Moan from 91 Hill Street. I'm sorry that thank you very much for letting me speak and for this very long meeting. And I'm sorry that Mr. Gilmartin feels that the comments from the attorney representing 91 Hill Street LLC were disingenuous. I think that the attempt at landscaping, at the beautiful backyards for people to be able to use at a home for some of our empty nesters wanting to move from homes into condominiums are all very well spoken. I think some of the concerns are really the density, as Mr. Fife had said. What we have here, whether it's under the R20 with 37 pre-existing units, not 76, not 67, or whether it's in the multifamily district where we could have, I believe it's 8 units per the zoning, is what I think we're trying to address here. I believe, as somebody who lives, works in the Southampton Village, that it's the density, it's the mass that is a little bit out of character here, and I would ask that this board look into the square footage, the lot coverage, the side yard variances, the rear yard variances, the density, and the number of units. And that's all. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Penny.
Just one quick comment. There's a provision in your zoning code that says 6 units per acre in an MFPRD. Everybody wants to shove us into another zone, the MF20 or the MF25, of course, because it's going to reduce the density. There's a provision. We could have gone to the Board of Trustees, MFPRD, 6 units per every 40,000 square feet, using both 30 units. That's what you should be thinking about. That's the fair
David,
comparison.
You didn't do that,
You
though.
didn't go there.
Right. I told you why.
But who knows what success you would have found there? I mean, you're asking us to assume that it would have...
I'm asking you to look at it and and I gave you the comparison, right? We meet it, 120,000 square foot minimum. We blow that away. Look at the plan. Look at our analysis. We blow it away. That's what I think the comparison should be, not these other lesser zones that people want to restrict us with. Thank you.
David, can I ask you a question just in that regard? Did the FEIS, DEIS evaluate the alternative? You've done a great job showing the comparison to the MFPRD. Did you do the MF20 and did you do the R20 and
that was not
explain why they wouldn't be feasible or why they're not beneficial to the community? I understand doing R20 for all the reasons maybe Mr. Emilita indicated is probably not appropriate. And I would think just to create a good record here to understand that it was evaluated.
It was outside the scope of the DEIS. What we did is the no action alternative and then a subdivision alternative, which weren't feasible financially.
But you've done a good job here, but you've only compared it to the MFPRD. I would suggest maybe you might want to look at those two and create a record so that we can at least say we've evaluated them all and determine if it's appropriate that they are not beneficial to the neighborhood as well.
We can do that analysis.
If that's it, there's no more comments. I move that the March 2018 meeting of the Southampton ZBA
Got to adjourn this to the
be
next.
closed.
Before you
So
close, got to
moved,
adjourn.
seconded.
Oh, we have to adjourn this one first.
Oh,
We didn't adjourn
I
this one.
move we adjourn this application for all purposes.
Now do the other.
Then close the meeting.
Second it, please.
Who's in
All in
favor?
favor? Aye.
Now do the other one.
I move we close the meeting of March of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.